Jefferson is afraid of tyranny and monarchy, right? As the author of all those definitions of tyranny in the Declaration, he's very concerned about a central federal government and especially an enormously powerful president who will keep power from where it belongs, which is with the people. Jefferson is an enormous believer in the people.
Jane Kamensky, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Andrew.
So you are the president of Monticello. Can you tell us a little bit about Monticello and its importance to U.S. history?
I sure can. Monticello is the home of Thomas Jefferson, our first Secretary of State, second Vice President, and third President of the United States. He started building it in the late 1760s and fussed with it almost until the time of his death in July 4th of 1826. And it's a really important place to learn about our highest ambitions as a country, about our greatest complexities as a country, because Monticello was a plantation as well as a home and an estate, and as well as the struggles of people, both Black and white, to make the promises of the Declaration of Independence true.
What is Monticello doing to celebrate America's 250th birthday?
So we're doing a lot of things as the home of the primary author of the Declaration of Independence. Really want to raise awareness of the Declaration and all of the promise that it has held out to the nation over 249 years and holds for us still. We're also thinking of 2026 as a kind of shovels in the ground moment where we inspire Americans to commit anew to the American experiment and our bonds together. So we're engaged in a number of special events, but also in a number of programs that will sustain throughout 2025 and 2026 and beyond. One of those is the Founding Friends, Founding Foes tour, which I believe you had the occasion to take a couple of weeks ago.
Not yet. I plan on doing so.
Okay, there was going to be a short quiz, but I'll save that now.
Great. We'll have to rejoin in a few weeks.
So we've developed a special tour called Founding Friends, Founding Foes that explores the political history of the early United States, the intense factionalism and partisanship as people who came together to pledge their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor in the Declaration, came apart about the routes that they would take to pursue this vision of a self-governed nation in the hands of people created equal, pursuing life, liberty, and happiness. The tour leans especially on the friendship of John Adams with Thomas Jefferson, two of the committee of five who drafted the original Declaration. Adams knew that he was not the one to hold the pen, since he was, in his own words, obnoxious and disliked, and also knew how important it was for a Virginian to be one of the front men for this moment of intense risk-taking and innovation and departure. So they were together at that moment in 76, fought a lot of the intellectual battles of the Revolution together, served in government together under George Washington, and came apart over their ideas of the way that the country should realize its promise. Particularly important for us on this tour, they also decided to take the risk of talking to each other after a long season of division. And we share with our guests what it took for them to overcome their differences and realize that what bound them together was more important than what held them apart. So that tour, which just launched in May of 2025, it's been under development for about a year before then, is one of the signature offerings that we will put before the country as a birthday gift in 2026 and beyond.
So we're going to get into the Jefferson-Adams relationship in just a second, but tell me about why their relationship and that story still matters today.
So they mattered to the country from the beginning, right? They were two of the progenitors. Adams as a kind of lion of liberty, writing as Novanglis during the imperial struggle in Boston, and working really hard to make the to make the cause of Massachusetts the common cause of all. And then probably in 1776 enlisted Jefferson, a young Virginian, a young member of the delegation, in the drafting of the Declaration of Independence. So they had a kind of early brotherhood in creating the vision statement of the nation. And then they ended together in ways that were incredibly compelling for Americans in 1826 and since. They both died famously on July 4th of the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Each friends to the last, and Adams famously believing that at least Jefferson had survived him when Jefferson predeceased him by a couple of hours. So they had an ending that was too good for a novel. And between the two of them, over the 50 years that they knew each other, went through most of the battles of the early United States, right? Would power reside in trade or in agriculture? Would the greatest ally of the United States be France or England? Should the power of the people be manifested in the states and state legislatures, or more tightly controlled at the level of the federal government? So their differences mattered, right? Their fights are fights that we still have today. And I think really inspiring for the Monticello audience and others, they decided that they could frankly air their differences, not really helping to or succeeding in changing each other's minds, but wanting, as a late letter says, to explain themselves to each other, right? There's an 1813 letter that says, "You and I ought not to die before explaining ourselves to each other." So that slow, patient work, conducted over more than 1,000 letters during their lifetime, and more than 100 letters after a long political separation, political estrangement, nearly a dozen years, is, sort of shows us a way through in times of intense division of our own.
So I actually want to talk about the middle of this story, and I want to talk
Mm-hmm.
about Dr. Benjamin Rush. He was a founding father, and how he served as a bridge between Jefferson and Adams. Can you tell me about Dr. Rush?
Yeah, so Dr. Rush of Pennsylvania, very important at the time of the founding, a good friend to Jefferson and Adams both, an ally of some of the most what we might call progressive elements of the Revolutionary era, including education for women. Abigail Adams had made that famous plea, "Remember the ladies." Jefferson was not one who thought women should be involved in political life. Rush gave a lot of thought to the kind of education that American women needed to form laboratories of virtue in their households. In other words, to raise good citizens. So Rush is one of the many good folks of the American Revolution, and he thinks it's a terrible shame that Jefferson and Adams have fallen out. And he takes a tack that would be familiar to eighth graders everywhere in the United States today. He writes to Jefferson and says, "Psst, Adams really wants to hear from you. He told me to tell you." And then he writes to Adams and says, "Jefferson really wants to hear from you. He told me to tell you." And it's Adams who, more avid in most things, it's Adams who caves first, writes to Jefferson and says, "I've been thinking about you," essentially. So Rush is a key intermediary. There are others who try to play that role, and there are a couple of stumbles in the early 1800s where briefly Jefferson and Abigail Adams are back in touch after the death of Jefferson's daughter. But it's Rush who really succeeds in putting them back in conversation. Once he sets the friendship back in motion, he steps away, but he plays a crucial role as an intermediary.
So now let's go back in time even further. How did their friendship begin?
So they met at the Second Continental Congress in the spring of 1776. Adams brought Jefferson into the Committee of Five that drafted the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson didn't consider it the most important assignment that was on offer. He was much more interested in the action in the Virginia State House. He thought the state constitutions were the essential work of government at the time. And he also was really pining for his young and sick wife at home, who had just gone through childbirth and was ailing. So Jefferson wasn't particularly eager for the job, but Adams thought that it was important to have him. Adams knew him on the page from the Summary View of the Rights of British Americans, which Jefferson had authored anonymously in 1774, but it was well known to be the product of his pen, and it was one of the bolder efforts, not exactly calling for separation from England, but going farther than anybody else had done at the time. So Adams knew him and liked his mind on the page. As I said before, he also knew that you really couldn't plot a common cause of 13 distinct rebellious mini republics if you didn't have Virginia. The most populous, one of the richest, one of the most essential in printing and thinking and educating. So he enlisted Jefferson as a Virginian. They were very unlike, right? If the Continental Congress was a World War II buddy movie, they played different types. Adams didn't know when to shut up. Jefferson barely permitted himself to speak publicly, and Adams writes about this when he meets him, that he hasn't heard him put two sentences together. Jefferson keeps his own counsel, and Adams can barely keep his own mouth shut. And I think they recognize in each other sort of compatible strengths and compatible differences, ways that they could move further together than they did separately.
And before they served in the Washington administration, they bonded in Europe, right? They were representing the United States overseas. And I think Thomas Jefferson's daughter even at one point stays with the Adams in England while Jefferson is in France. So did that bond deepen over in Europe?
Absolutely, and became even more of a family bond, right? So Jefferson is minister plenipotentiary to France, living in Paris. Adams is representing the United States in London, is there with his wife Abigail and some of his children. They tour together, they see each other often, and I think the friendship, especially between Jefferson and Abigail Adams, whom he respected enormously, deepened while they were overseas. Abigail Adams becomes a kind of godmother like figure, or fictive aunt figure to Jefferson's daughters whose mother has passed when they were very, very young. So it's an important time for them together, even though in some ways each of them is being pulled into a European model that comes to divide them, right? Adams rekindling his admiration for English systems of government, English patterns of trade, and Jefferson enormously enamored with France on the eve of revolution, right? Jefferson is in France when the Bastille falls and sees this as the sort of next play in the ball of American liberty rolling around the world. Adams thinks revolutionary France is moving quickly towards catastrophe.
Sally Hemings visited Jefferson while he was in France, while Jefferson was in France, and didn't Sally stay with the Adams as well?
So Sally Hemings came over to be a woman servant to one of Jefferson's daughters. Stays with the Adamses in London all the way. Stays with the Adamses in London at the beginning of her long European sojourn. There is a letter from Abigail Adams saying that she's unimpressed with the gravitas of Sally Hemings, who is a young teenager at the time she crosses the ocean with that duty. So Abigail Adams would have seen her and the household up close when they were all there in Europe.
So even with slavery, their division over slavery, they were able to maintain a friendship?
Keep in mind that almost everybody who the Adamses knew from outside New England and Pennsylvania would have been in the slaveholding classes, right? Slavery is the institution that is fundamental to the cash crop growing areas of what becomes the United States. Jefferson is an enemy and a practitioner of slavery. So when you read their letters, there are many areas around the moral evil of slavery that they actually agree on. And the Adamses too harden their stance about slavery as time moves on. So Jefferson was friends with many people who were from non-slaveholding colonies, later states, and Adams was friends with many people who were enslavers, and that was the political set of bonds if we were to have a union of colonies as the United States.
And so they return to this fledgling nation, and they serve in the first administration in U.S. history. When does that fracture, begin to be set in motion?
So I would say by 1793 or 1794, Jefferson is extremely dissatisfied with Hamilton's financial programs. Hamilton is the sort of arch federalist of the Washington administration. And by 1796, Jefferson is allowing himself to be put forward as a candidate to oppose Washington's chosen successor in John Adams. So, both Adams and Jefferson are proponents of the Constitution, though Jefferson is a staunch supporter of the need for a Bill of Rights, and Adams, as a Federalist, thinks that that's less important to enumerate those rights than the Anti-Federalists do. Jefferson is not an anti-federalist as a supporter of the Constitution, but retains the anti-federalist tendencies toward devolution, right? Towards the importance of state governments over the federal power. He's very concerned. A way to think about their differences is to think about what are they most afraid of. Adams is most afraid of oligarchy. He's afraid of the rise of the few, the moneyed, the powered, the privileged. And the way Adams thinks those will best be kept checked is by a strong single executive power. Jefferson is afraid of tyranny and monarchy, right? As the author of all those definitions of tyranny in the Declaration, he's very concerned about a central federal government and especially an enormously powerful president who will keep power from where it belongs, which is with the people. Jefferson is an enormous believer in the people. So in the course of the Washington administration, they play a part in what are not parties at first, but factions, as Madison would have called them, proto-parties by 1794 or 1795, and then functioning pretty fully as parties in the elections of 1796 and 1800. So by 1796, they're all but campaigning against each other, right? In 18th century logic, gentlemen don't campaign for themselves because everybody is campaigning for the nation, but they allow partisan newspapers to fight their battles with each other. And the relationship has become very vexed by the time Adams wins, with the second highest vote getter becoming his vice president. And before the amendment changing the system, the second highest vote getter can be of the other party. And so Adams has his Democratic Republican opponent as his vice president.
And so, the election of 1800 is a rematch of the election of 1796. How hurt is Adams when he loses with this idea that he won't be a two-term president like Washington?
Adams has big feelings, right? I think, he is an emotionally astute man. He wears his heart on his sleeves, or at least he wears his heart in his letters. And, the country has turned against him. The election is very divided in 1800, but the verdict against Adams is decisive, right? None of the things that Congress is toying with would return Adams for a second term. The Alien and Sedition Acts have been an enormous blot on his record. I think Adams has tried to steer a course between the Hamiltonians and the Jeffersonians and has pleased absolutely nobody. So it's clear to Adams by 1800, by the time election results are being tallied in 1800 from the state legislatures, that he's lost the country. I think that's a terrible wound, that he's lost it to Jefferson, his former friend, who he thinks did not fight fair and did not fight fair with the press, is even more painful. It's also a painful time for Adams personally because his son dies between the election and the inauguration. So he's dealing with personal tragedy, political failure, and just the pain of having really believed in solutions that simply did not work. Adams did not attend Jefferson's inauguration. So we read Jefferson's inauguration, which I think is one of his most important public addresses, that first inaugural address, where he holds out this olive branch, right? We are all Democrat Republicans. We are all Federalists. And Adams is not there to hear it. Adams left for Massachusetts, left Jefferson his horses, but did not stay in the audience to witness what we now know as, a signal moment in the history of modern republics, the first peaceful transfer of power from one party to another.
Just before that speech, can you tell me about the midnight appointments that Adams had?
So Adams made a series of midnight appointments to the federal judiciary, which he thought would be a way of keeping his version of the balance of powers, living into an administration run by Democratic Republicans. Jefferson vitiates all of those appointments, and also releases all the pressmen that Adams has jailed in the Alien and Sedition Acts. So this feels to Adams like political war. It's one of the things in that stumbling attempt at a return of the friendship in 1804, where Jefferson is in epistolary conversation with Abigail. It's one of the things that she brings up, the ousting of the midnight judges, as something that feels to her really like a breach of the constitutional order.
How long did Jefferson and Adams not speak for?
11 years.
And was there jealousy on Adams' part over Jefferson getting credit for writing the Declaration of Independence, which
I think that they both demur on the authorship of the Declaration of Independence into the 1820s, right? Jefferson does list himself on his own tombstone as the author of the Declaration of Independence, but in the teens and early 20s, he always batted away personal credit and said that it was an expression of the American mind, and spoke of himself as more the scribe than the author, rather than the genius in the attic. So I think it's not that Jefferson has been running all over the country saying it was mine. I think Adams has a somewhat covetous personality, and I think Adams was somebody who made easy things hard, and Jefferson was somebody who seemed to live a life of relative luxury and ease. And I think that just the unruffled exterior of Jefferson was maddening to Adams.
So, what made reconciliation possible?
The males? No, seriously. I mean, I think that Adams was willing to take up Russia's invitation and take an enormous ego risk, right? Somebody who has stepped away from your correspondence table for a decade. Um, uh, I think the slowness of communication really helped. And when we think at Monticello in our Founding Friends, Founding Foes tour about what we want people to take away from the possibility of knitting up this friendship, despite its profound differences, and in the face of those profound differences, the communication medium of the time made it essential that they would take a breath, right? If Adams wrote something that really got Jefferson's dander up when it reached Monticello, well, it was a week and a half on the road to get there. And you could take a moment knowing that it would be a week and a half on the road to get back. So it's not quite the thumb wars that we're engaged in every day. I think belief in the common project of the United States, that that whatever their differences had been and remained, that their faith and their hopes for the future of the American experience were more important. And they also saw common threats, right? Jefferson understood the rise of Andrew Jackson and this rough populism coming out of the West as a kind of threat to a virtuous republic. Adams thought so too, and even more so because it was his son, John Quincy, who bested who bested Jackson for the presidency in 1824. So they had a sense of common threats of against the thing that they had both started, and then I guess they also had the wisdom of ages, right? And a sense of their own mortality. That if they were going to make it up, there was only the now. They're in their 70s and 80s when they resume their correspondence in the early 18 teens. Adams is 90 and Jefferson is 82 by the time they die. So they're in a reflective moment of their lives. I guess I would add also, it's a good question, Andrew. Nobody's ever asked it of me. I would add also that they're both retired from public service, right? The correspondence doesn't start until Jefferson has left the presidency. They both know that, heavy is the head that refuses to wear the crown in the American case, and have both been subject to the slings and arrows of the press, of public opinion. They've both been through it, even though they've been through it for different reasons and in different ways.
And how did their post presidencies differ? Jefferson goes back to Monticello, and I think he quickly founds the University of Virginia, right? But Adams retreats to Massachusetts and lives a pretty quiet life.
They both live pretty quiet lives. So Jefferson has been talking about the necessity of public education since the 1780s. He finally gets the University of Virginia chartered in 1817. So it's 8 years after his retirement. And if you look at the daily records of what each of them is doing after the presidency, they return in their own different ways to living on farms, right? Jefferson is botanizing and ceaselessly experimenting with the crops that he's growing at Monticello. And Adams is puttering around up in Peacefield and also living a rural life, a seed of virtue. They both read relentlessly. It's one of the things that they share in those late letters, is what each of them are reading. Jefferson is involved with the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia. Adams with the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So they're both committed to leaving a record of the life of the mind in the young United States, but they are fully retired from politics, and happily so.
When they're writing these letters, do they know that one day people will pore over them, and are they keeping that in mind when they're writing it?
That's a really interesting question. I think most letters in the 18th and 19th century were not thought of as being private, right? That people would read. They're almost like a Substack, right? People would share their letters with a community of followers that was pretty narrowly defined, right? A family and household. I think by the time they die, the founding fathers are beginning to be turned into statues, right? Their papers considered more important. There's been an effort to collect Washington's papers. It's really family members who save those letters for the ages. So I would say they would not have thought that they were writing only to each other, but Adams would not have thought that people beyond the walls of Monticello were reading what he would write, and Jefferson would have thought the same, that it was staying in a family and household context. It's really the middle of the 19th century when every drop of ink that any founder has ever spilled is beginning to be collected as the record of a nation and the record of a family.
And if you made a word cloud of those letters, what would pop out at you? What do they talk about in those letters?
Well, we could do that, couldn't we? That's a great idea. I think America, posterity, republic, union would be huge for all of them. And we would be amazed at how many family keywords came through. So I think one of the sort of secret sauces of their resumed friendship is they talk about what's close to them. Yes, they talk about the election of 1824, but they talk about it through the person of John Quincy Adams, who Jefferson had known from a boy, and Adams thought of as the future of the republic. So all of the highfalutin thinking about the United States, its past, where it needed to go, was often worked out in a context of sharing family news. And I think words around family would be large too.
And so it's the 250th birthday of America, but it's also the 200th anniversary of these two founding fathers' deaths. Why was their same day death so symbolic? And can you talk to me about what John Quincy Adams, who was the president at the time, said about the two of them, his own father and his father's one-time rival, now later friend, dying on the same day?
So the 50th anniversary of the United States is the first big moment for a growing, vibrant, chaotic country to look back and think about where it's been. Right, an anniversary measures a journey and looks ahead. So July 4th, 1826 is a time when a lot of ordinary Americans in 20 states are thinking about where they came from and where they're going. And it's the anniversary, of course, of the Declaration. So, in Massachusetts, there are efforts to bring Adams into public celebration. He's too old and infirm. In Virginia, Jefferson has said, among his last letters are saying that no, he can't attend the public celebration. He's too ill, but he will try to wave from his window. I think they are the OG, right? Like people want to see what's left of the founding generation, and there aren't many by 1826. So it's a natural moment for people born during the Revolution, but for the many generations born since. America is a very young country, to think about that accomplishment, to think about the rocky road, to think about whether the vision of the Declaration still holds. The early 1820s are the first time we see big commemorative printings of the Declaration to have in your house, right? Many American households have by then engravings, especially of George Washington. So it's poetic that they both die on this day. I think for Jefferson, especially, there's evidence that he hung on so that it would be the 4th.
Really?
Right. Like people hang on for a family wedding or to see that grandchild graduate. They cared too. Daniel Webster gives an incredible eulogy to the two of them shortly after they die, just marking the milestone and using their death basically to turn a page for the country. It's the end of the beginning, is a way that we could think of July 4th, 1826.
How do you interpret Adams's last words?
I'm not sure I know. Oh, Adams's last words are Jefferson lives.
Right.
Thomas Jefferson still lives. I've seen them now in theater and realized in many first person interpretations, and in those first person interpretations, it always sounds wistful, right? Like, at least I am going to my great reward, but at least Jefferson still lives. I think you could also hear it as a little jealous. Jefferson still lives.
Right.
Last words are an industry, but we're pretty convinced that that these were things that were actually said, that there are enough, near simultaneous recordings. It's not hazy rose-colored glasses of memory.
How do you hope people feel when they leave the tour?
I want them to leave the tour with a sense of possibility and a sense that if you're really worried about that person who you're going to see at Thanksgiving who votes differently from you, you might think of that as an opportunity rather than as a social terror, and not as an opportunity to change the mind of your Harris voting aunt or your Trump voting uncle, but as an opportunity, as Adam said, to explain yourselves to each other. I want people to leave knowing that these were two founders who relished their unity and relished their differences, and did not re-engage because they thought they would change each other's minds, but that they thought that each other's minds were worth listening to and unfolding.
I can't wait to go on this tour. And can you share with the audience where they can buy tickets?
I sure can. So go to Monticello.org and look for the Founding Friends, Founding Foes tour. We're particularly excited that on the last tour of the day, on weekends through October, you can participate in a Feast of Reason, which is a Jeffersonian conversation guided by a deck of cards that lead you through a rich conversation with strangers. So that's a special occasion on the weekends. Cool. We also hope that people who are inspired by Founding Friends, Founding Foes, and others will join us in Declaration Book Club, which is a virtual open educational resource available on our website to download. 3 meetings reflecting on the world that made the Declaration in 76, the world in which Adams and Jefferson died in 1826, and then the ongoing legacies of the Declaration today.
Amazing. Jane Kamensky, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.